Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at It's Dark in London, a comic book anthology edited by Oscar Zarate for the Masque Noir imprint of Serpent's Tail Books. This is an English publisher. Masque Noir specializes in, as the name implies, noir books. They reprint the Walter Mosley books for the English market. Also, they publish other writers, English writers of that ilk. But they decided to make a comic book anthology. I don't think they've ever done this before or since. They usually just print prose. But really nice lineup. Most of these stories are written by prose writers, usually from the mystery field. Some of them are playwrights and work for BBC radio and television. But they've also, Oscar Zarate also recruited a stellar lineup of comics creators to be in this as well. The cover is drawn by Geoff Granfield. Really nice design, though. It's designed by Oscar Zarate with a little help from Dave McKean, but nice drawn, really sharp design. It's a pretty mid-sized graphic novel. It's about that fat. And just a good-looking book all around. And as the name would imply, all of these stories take place in London. We have the title page. Oh, I forgot to mention, this came out in 1996, which is when comics were kind of getting more and more press as not just for kids anymore, you know. Have a list of other Masque Noir titles. And then we have the contents page. And we see a map of London behind it. I would say this anthology is almost like postmodern noir. A lot of the stories in here. Very, just kind of nebulous endings. Kind of opaque storylines, you know. Some of them are just downright poetical, you know. They're just not really sure what's going on. But they're all pretty damn interesting. We start off with You Are Here by Woodrow Phoenix. Woodrow Phoenix was part of that, you know, fast fiction group of small press cartoonists from the early 80s. He's done tons of stuff over the years. I think he does kids' books now, children's books, and but still does comics here and there. I haven't seen him in a while. But this is very, I don't know, kind of odd. It's almost like a mini travelogue of London. It's almost like you're traveling through London, and he's just illustrating various landmarks in London. So I'm not quite sure how to take this. I guess it is what it is. But it is almost like a nice introduction, like, okay, here we are in London, and all the stories are going to take place here. This story is called The Court, written by Neil Gaiman and drawn by Warren Pleece. I'm sure you all know who Neil Gaiman is. Warren Pleece also came up in the early 80s in that small press scene. He did a lot of stuff for 2000 AD, though, and then came to America and did tons of stories for Vertigo. Really like his style. Warren Pleece is really good for this kind of story. So we see this character named... actually, I don't think we ever find out his name, but he works for this hugely wealthy man. This man is so rich that nobody knows his name. Well, he knows his name, but only basically if you know his name, you're probably in too deep with him already. His name is Mr. Alice. So he's waiting for his boss in this train station. And it seems like the biggest part of his job is procuring young men for his boss. Mr. Alice has a yen for pretty young men. But we realize from his thoughts that he has a yen for an entirely different type of sexual encounter. We'll find a little bit more about that later. So Mr. Alice pulls up. He gets in the car. There's two bodyguards and Mr. Alice. So they go to this apartment. And this foreign woman opens the door, speaking another language. I forgot to mention they brought along this local professor from the college. He's an anthropologist who's an expert on these people, the Shahini. And he knows the language, so he's going to be their interpreter. And it turns out the Shahini are this legendary people. They're mentioned in Herodotus, in the Arabian Nights, in the Saragossa manuscript. But like as far as reliable historical sources, they kind of remain hidden. You really can't find out much about them unless you're really, into esoteric knowledge and really hunt it down. So apparently the Shahini, their culture, it's a matriarchy. And men are pampered and looked after by the women, and the men are considered their greatest treasure. So basically, even going back to the days of Alexander the Great and Nero, the Shahini would groom and raise these beautiful young men and then sell them off to people like Alexander the Great and Nero. They're incredibly expensive. Basically, the whole society lives off that money for years until they sell another young man off. So Mr. Alice wants one, and that's why he's there. He is introduced to him. He's gorgeous, this young guy. And Mr. Alice is very pleased with him. And he says, I'll take him. So the next day, our protagonist meets the professor on this bridge. And basically the professor fills him in on the whole history and culture of this society, of the Shahini. And the professor says, I'm straight, but I'd fuck that boy like a shot. He was so pretty. And our protagonist says, not really my cup of tea. And he says, I'm into little girls. And he admits to him, like, just unabashedly, he's just like, yeah, 11, 12, 13, 14 maybe. Older than that, I can't really get into it. And the professor's just like, hey. But I guess this guy has lived in a world of criminality. And, he's protected by Mr. Alice's wealth, that he doesn't really have to worry about this morality or society's censures, The fact that he's so straightforward about it. So he summons a cab for the professor. But it's not just any cab. It's one of Mr. Alice's special cabs. And basically the professor's never going to walk out of that cab alive to ensure his silence. So the next few months are bliss for Mr. Alice. He's totally in love with this young man. I like this panel of the protagonist having nightmares about those Shahini, those old Shahini women. It's kind of like bat creatures. After a few months, though, unfortunately, the young man got the flu, the Shahini man, and he died. And Mr. Alice was inconsolable. So Mr. Alice's guys go back to the apartment. The Shahini women are long gone. There's a bunch of New Zealanders living there. And they're searching high and low for any sign of that the Shahini lived there or any clues. And our protagonist runs upstairs and he opens a door and there's a woman sleeping in bed. And it says a full black-nippled breast which curved disturbingly in the sodium light of the street. That's what he sees. And he just seems to be transfixed by it. And like I said, once again, this kind of weird nebulous ending. I think what it's basically saying, though, is like he's so in awe because he's never seen a grown woman before naked. Or at least it's weirding him out. Very odd ending. This next story is called Dancing with Death. And it's words by Graham Gordon, art by Dix with an X. And kind of got this interesting washed out style, this Dix guy. This is about this kid, Jason. He wants to be a musician, but he's a bartender to pay the bills. He gets to work for open mic night, and the boss says, "You're not getting up on stage. We need you behind the bar. It's going to be crazy." He's like, "God, fuck." And so he goes into the bathroom. He's doing some, it looks like he's snorting some coke. And he passes out. Blood starts streaming down his nose, out of his nose, and he passes out. When he wakes up, there's this woman in the men's room, and she's got all these cuts on her arms, like she's one of those self-harmers, you know? And she really seems to be taken with him already. And so the bar worker, one of the bar workers says, "Hey, come on, get behind the bar. What the hell are you doing in here?" And he says, "Fuck this, let's go." So she takes him back to her apartment and lights some candles, and she offers him some drugs, these black pills he doesn't recognize. So they hit him really hard. And in fact, they hit him so hard he can't move. And she tells him, "I'm sorry, Jason, you'll be all right. In a few hours it'll wear off and you'll be able to start moving again." So she puts him down on the bed, takes off all of her clothes, and gets on top of him. And then she puts a bag over her head. I guess this is her weird fetish. And as she orgasms, she knocks over one of the candles, and she kind of passes out. I guess she asphyxiated herself a little too much. And while she's passed out, the fire starts spreading. And the whole time, Jason's awake. And he's just thinking, "Charlotte." Finally, she wakes up, she pukes, and she looks over, and Jason is burnt to a crisp. And the last panel is her outside of her flat, looking up as the firefighters fight the fire. This next story is called Frozen. Story by Chris Webster. Pictures by Carl Flint. This is a good one. This Carl Flint has a really weird style, as you can see. Everyone's heads are insanely huge. He looks like he's a caricature artist of some type. He works for the NME, so I'm sure they utilize his talents there in that way. So I guess this guy Alex, he's applying for a modeling job. He comes inside. This woman artist is basically says, "Take off your clothes." And then she tells him that he has to drink all of this water. So it turns out her art project is that she gets men to come up and pee in this giant homemade trough she made out of garbage bags and other stuff. And she pays them for it. And basically she freezes the urine into big blocks. And then she takes a chainsaw to it and sculpts it and, turns it into sculpture. They kind of have a little debate about art, He says, "Oh, this is the kind of art, it's just for shock value." They had a little debate about that. But he's kind of reticent about even doing this. He's like, "This is a weird job." So she basically kind of seduces him, and they have sex. When they're done, pretty instantly, we realize he's kind of smitten with her. She was just like, She always treats it like it was just a simple transaction. These faces, just crazy. And then they have another kind of debate about, what's the most important thing in life, love and relationships, or working passionately for your art. And obviously this artist woman is, you could probably tell her answer. She's just like, love, relationships. That's just shit people do out of fear. This is the stuff that's important, making art. So the next time he comes to visit, he actually brings along a gallon of piss. And he's like, oh, this will give us more time together because you're paying for my time, basically. And I'd rather have more time to just hang with you. So he's really in love, And she's basically just like, oh, man, chill out. So one day he comes to her house with flowers and a gallon of piss. And he overhears her talking to a friend. She's saying, most of the guys are incredibly cagey about giving me their piss. I even have to sleep with some of them just to keep them around long enough to finish the job. And Alex bursts in and says, you bitch, I've been so stupid thinking you could have loved me. And she basically says, don't get mad, Alex. My work is more important than anything. You know that. And he picks up a hammer, and it looks like he's going to smash her statues. But she picks up her chainsaw and defends the statues and says, you better not. I'll fucking chop your head off. So he runs from the apartment with the hammer, screaming, I loved her. Poor Sat. And then it looks like it's a few days later, we hear an answering message on Alex's phone. And she says, it was you, wasn't it? Had to be. Wrecked everything. The electricity was shut off at the museum. The heating turned on. All my work melted. Ruined. They had to stop my residency because, as you can imagine, the floors were all ruined. All of that urine melted and just flooded the place. I love it. I was just going down the staircase here, dripping from the balcony onto the statue. She says, all my work is gone. I have nothing left. What am I going to do now? I've lost everything. And we can see from Alex's face that there are differing points of view. They both have lost everything, even though they're different things. He lost what he thought was a true love, and she lost her art. So next one we have is Lucky Dip by Stella Duffy, with art by Melinda Gebbie, the great underground cartoonist. Also probably most popular for illustrating Lost Boys for Alan Moore. And I gotta say though, this 90s Melinda Gebbie art, it's a little too inconsistent. It's not nearly as good as her stuff from the undergrounds. She always had a little inconsistency in her art where some panels would just be amazingly drawn, like just crazy amount of detail. And some of these panels are amazing, but then some of them are just, I don't know. The faces are kind of weird. And this dog is drawn pretty crappy as well. So I believe this woman's name is Sheila. And we see this woman, Sheila, walking her dog. And she apparently goes to this fish and chips place all the time. And she always orders them with extra salt. No vinegar on the fries. On the chips, I should say. And then this stranger, this woman, says, too much salt is bad for your heart, And let me double check and see if this woman's name really is Sheila. I don't want to be saying her name wrong the whole time. I'm sorry, her name's Sophie. So Sophie blows up. She's like, well, what do you know about my heart? It was made redundant last month when I left my husband. So apparently she lost her job all in like a month. The past month, she lost her job. She lost her husband because she left him. And then the person that she left her husband for isn't returning her calls. So she's got nothing. So she's pissed off. See, look what I'm talking about, how great the art is here. It's amazing. Just for these background characters. But then he draws like the main characters kind of So then the next day, this other woman with a dog says, bag of chips, please. Lots of salt. And these two guys who have been hovering around the cart are like, what the hell? So it turns out this fish and chips place was a front for a drug dealing operation. So this vendor was told that like the code word or the situation would be a woman with a dog will come up to you and say, I want chips with extra salt. And these two thugs, drug dealing thugs, were like, "You gave it to the wrong person, you prick." He's like, "I didn't know. I was just doing what you told me to do." Just a coincidence that Sophie, came by with her dog. And so this woman with the dog, she's like, "I'm not hanging about if there's any trouble." He's like, "You're not going anywhere." Kind of threatens her. So her dog rips this guy's arm to pieces. So one of the thugs runs off to chase after Sophie and her dog, and the other guy stays behind to take care of this guy because his arm is really messed up. Just look at this total 9-panel grid. It's like she's taking a page from her husband Alan Moore's book from The Watchmen and doing that same storytelling. Meanwhile, we find out that that woman is kind of following Sophie around. We see her here lurking in this alley. She's definitely following her. So then the drug dealer catches up with Sophie and fucking just stabs her in the neck. Leaves her bleeding on the pavement. And that strange woman pushes the guy off his motorcycle. And she beats the crap out of him. Looks like she leaves him for dead. And then she walks off. And we see Sophie's, such a weird panel. Sophie's just bleeding out, bleeding to death. And her dog isn't even concerned. He's just licking her blood happily. So then that woman, we see her walk back to her apartment. And she lives with this woman. They're lovers. And this other woman says, "You saw Sophie? You told her to leave me alone?" And the woman who was following Sophie says, "Yep, she won't be bothering you again." And the other one says, "I'm finally free." God, she was such a manipulative woman. What do people like that get out of controlling people? And then we see her girlfriend kind of stroking her and I think implying that, oh, maybe she's another controlling person now she's gonna have to contend with. But I don't know, I could just be reading that into it. This next story is called The Griffin's Egg. It's written by Ian Sinclair, hot shit English author, and the imagery is by Dave McKean. And this is that time when Dave McKean was doing total mixed media comics, using photography, full-on painting, line art, and just all mashing it together. So it looks kind of good. It's nice design. But this one is a little too photo heavy for me. Just because I always prefer art over photos, no matter how interesting they're manipulated. But it looks good. So this one's, I guess, it's very poetical, which is basically a code word for me just not really getting it. It's kind of opaque, the story. It's almost, the captions read like poetry. And basically there's this guy who's a photographer, and he has a job to provide pictorial evidence by gaining access to the Riverside penthouse apartment of a millionaire political fixer and blockbuster novelist named Lord Kahn. So I guess that's his mission, his job. So basically we just see him walking around London. And his thoughts, the captions are all of his thoughts, and they're very inscrutable. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. That looks pretty nice. It's interesting design there. See, a lot of this is lots of photos. But of course, Dave McKean does cool shit with them. Very diagrammic here, I like that. So he's getting closer to this guy's apartment. This is the kind of musings that he thinks. Crossing water is a kind of death. All plutocrats, as they get older, look the same. Microwaved banknotes. There's also weird, mechanical things in this story. For some reason, a lot of words drop the M. At one point he talked, you hear it. Think there's no memory without language, and the M is dropped. I don't think it's a mistake, because there's other words that start in M where the M is dropped. I don't get it at all, how it serves the purpose of the story. It's a little too postmodern for me, this story. So it's really nice to look at. So he gains access to Lord Collins' place. He's taking some pictures. And then I'm not even sure what happens because the art is so, I don't know, vague. It looks like somebody's shooting him. And he falls off the balcony. That's pretty clear. And then when he lands on the concrete, someone's taken a photo of him. So there you have it. Make of it what you will. This next one's Come Downtown by Carol Swain, the great English cartoonist. I love her stuff. And I'm glad she's writing her own story because she's a great writer. But I also love her style. It just fits her type of storytelling perfectly. So this is a weird kind of police procedural. Apparently there's this person committing these random crimes where they go into a bookstore, black out every page of a certain author's work, and then black the window of the store out. They black out the whole front window. We see a detective and his partner. They're on the case. They're at the scene of the crime, trying to figure out what the hell's going on. It seems like they're happening more and more frequently. And so it's just basically they're following the trail. They got no lead, so they're just trying to figure out, get into his mindset. What kind of person would do this? Obviously, the detective assumes it's probably a failed author. But they got no leads as far as which one. There's probably thousands of failed authors living in London, right? He starts leaving messages, though. Weird little cryptic messages. We find out that the detective himself likes to write a little. He writes a little free verse when he's bored in his car. And his partner takes note. Then he starts desecrating writers' memorials. Because, they'll have those little plaques that say, like, Dylan Thomas lived here. Famous poet. And he's, like, desecrating those. So he's, the evidence is mounting up that this guy's a bitter failed writer. And so they go into a paint store. They ask, has anyone bought a lot of black paint? The clerk says, yeah, he was just in here. Someone in here buying a lot of paint. And so they see a homeless guy, and the sign, the detective can tell by his diction that it's the criminal's work. I guess that criminal gave this homeless guy like a $5, said, hey, hold the sign for the rest of the day. And he knew that eventually the detectives might see it. So he's playing cat and mouse with them. And then they see it. They see a trail of black paint. Clear as day. So obviously he wants them to find his lair or him. And there's cryptic messages on the way as they follow this trail. You can't ignore history. And as they get to the front door at this apartment, welcome to my world. And when they go inside, just as they thought, they find these rejection letters from various publishers and evidence of, works being blacked out. The partner says, do you think he was working alone, sir? And the detective says, yes, but is. The present tense, Joan. He is working alone. And once again, I don't know if I'm like, is this some ironic twist? Is he the one who is the criminal? I don't necessarily think so. But it just has this ending of just huh? I really like this next one, The Hard Shoulder. It's a Christopher Pettit, writer, and Gary Marshall, artist. And Gary Marshall just drew some comics in the 90s. I don't think he did much because it sounded like he had to work in the computer field to make his rent. But I think his art is very serviceable for this story. It really fits. So we see this guy O'Grady. He's just getting back to London after a stint in jail. We see a flashback to his 8-year-old daughter back when she was 8. And it looks like she's a sweet little kid and he was kind of happy. He loved her. So she's 18 now and he's back in London. He wants to find her. He gets a room in a boarding house. And the woman says, like, it's not too fancy here. Don't expect a red carpet. And he says, peace and quiet is all I'm asking. So he goes up to his room, and when he comes down to the lobby, there's this bearded guy there. And later on at the pub, the guy sits down next to O'Grady, and he says, oh, let me tell you a story. There's a feller did a bank job, got double-crossed, and went down for a stretch. Still owed big bucks. Do you know the story? He's obviously talking about O'Grady. So this guy works for the mob, and O'Grady used to. So basically, the mob is really worried that O'Grady's back to get his money that he's been owed, because they never paid him the money they owed him. O'Grady says, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a shit about the money. I'm here for a different reason. And he kind of roughs up the guy, threatens him. Basically says, back off. So he pays a visit to his ex-wife, and the mother of his daughter. And God, he's kind of a brutal man, just like kind of roughs her up, throws her down the ground. And she eventually ends up telling him how to find her. And I guess it's not as hard as he would think, because she thinks to herself, you deserve each other. So apparently the mother's not, very close with her daughter. So he goes to this club, and he finds Lily. And she basically says, who the fuck are you? Fuck off. And her friend defends her honor, says, yeah, you heard the lady. And he headbutts him. The bouncers come to drag him away. And Lily looks off after him and realizes, and she just says, Daddy? So O'Grady walks off, and one of the mob guys shows up, tries to take him out, but O'Grady gets the drop on him and shoots him. And he's just really pissed off. He's just like, I don't even want the fucking money. That's why they're trying to kill me. I just want to see Lily. And he has a memory of cute young Lily again. So another guy takes a shot at him. It's the bearded guy from earlier. He's chasing him around. And once again, O'Grady gets the drop on him and shoots him. And he asks him why. And the guy says, for the money. It was cheaper to kill you than pay you what you're owed. And he's so frustrated. He's just like, I told you I didn't give a damn. I don't even care about the money. All of this was for nothing. So then the police show up. O'Grady jumps in his car, tries to pull away, but he realizes it's hopeless. The cops are going to get him. So he's going over this bridge, and he swerves and breaks through the railway, flying off into the sky. I love that panel. And his last memory is hanging out with his daughter, and she's calling him Daddy. And then as his car begins its plummet into the river, he says, peace and quiet is all I was asking. Oh, I love that story. It's a good one. It reminds me of like, I can't remember the name of that movie by, The Limey. That's what I was thinking of. Next, we have The Body by Ilya. You may know Ilya's name. He was did a lot of art assistance to Eddie Campbell on the Bacchus stories. And I've actually never seen his work outside of that. But he did tons of mini comics in the 80s and 90s and did stuff in lots of like semi-pro magazines. But it's really annoying in this. I think he just bought a computer or something. And he's trying to do this weird computer effect on a lot of the art, and it just looks muddy and crappy. Some of the panels are just drawn nicely, like this. And then a lot of them, though, unfortunately, have this computer phase effect on them. So the story starts off with they find a dead body in the canal, and the police fish it out, and they bring it to the coroner. See, look what I'm talking about. This looks okay, but then that just looks like crap. Like this stupid computer effect. I don't even see the dramatic purpose of it. It's not like, oh, here's a flashback, so we'll give it a different look, So the coroner begins working on this body, finds out that it's not a woman, it's a hermaphrodite. Has both sexual organs of both male and female. Tells the police officers. And then after a long day working on the body, he just decides to take a walk to clear his head. And from his thoughts in the captions, we realize he's obviously kind of becoming obsessed with this hermaphrodite. Just can't stop thinking about, God, what is it like? I wish I could talk to them and ask them, it's just a strange new thing for him. And once again, it gets all computery and dumb. So as the days go on, he's definitely getting more obsessed. We see a panel of him grabbing her breast while he's working on her. Keeps asking himself questions about them. Were you loved? Were you ever in love? And if you took a lover, do you desire a woman or another man? And so he gets so kind of curious about this. He goes to his own house and kind of pulls a Silence of the Lambs, tucks his dick away, looks in the mirror, puts a little makeup on, and tries to pretend to be half man, half woman. So one night he's at home. He's pouring 2 glasses of wine and he's chatting with someone. He's all dressed up too, but you never see who he's talking to. So I think he's just imagining that the hermaphrodite is in his house, and he's really lost it sounds like. There's a knock at the door. It's his ex-wife, Fran, and this is weird because he's been telling everyone that Fran died, that he's a widower. But Fran just left him for another man. It's not like she didn't die at all. And we could tell by her dialogue with him that she has no affection for him. She's just there to get a few last things. Her new boyfriend, Philip, the one she left him for, is taking her on a nice vacation. She's kind of rubbing it in, And she tells him, Philip doesn't just need me, he wants me. Whereas you always preferred something a little more stiff. So this guy's always been a little weird about connecting with real humans and almost preferring the company of the corpses that he works on. The police call and said, hey, we got some follow-up news on that, the woman we fished at, the hermaphrodite we fished out of the river. We got the name, the ID, and he's trying to say, no, I don't want to know. And I guess the inspector doesn't hear him in time, and he says the name. And he says, I'd rather be left in the dark. And then he says, and then you were gone. So I think that something about him actually knowing her name, their name, knowing that they were a person, kind of broke the spell that he was kind of obsessed about them. And it broke that. Because now this is a person who had a life, with a name. But I mean, that's just my summation. I don't know. I could be totally wrong there. But once again, it's one of those little scratch your head endings, huh. This one's called A Flash in the Park, written by Jana Stajno and drawn by English cartoonist Chris Hogg. I think Jana Stajno is from Serbia, Croatia. And the story begins there. We see this woman. She's reminiscing back to her days in Serbia and Croatia. And she's with her 2 dogs. And she's frolicking in the park. It just looks really beautiful. This is obviously before the war, ruined the country in the 90s. So she mentions that after the war, she had to leave England, and now she lives in London with her mother, and she doesn't like it at all. She says the people are cold, and everything's ugly and dirty, and it's London. It's not like where she grew up. But now she's back to her reminiscence. And one day this guy comes up to her in the woods, and he's all like, "Hey, I'm not crazy, I'm not going to hurt you, but I've got this urge to take off all my clothes in front of you." And he starts unzipping his pants. And I love this, how instead of just acting like a scared victim, she basically kind of gives him shit. Or just like stands firm. She's like, "Now hold on a moment. If it's all the same to you, I'd rather you didn't." And then she's asking him his name. And she's like, "You should get a job at an art college. You could get paid for showing off your naked body." And then she's almost flirting with him, and it's freaking him out. Because this guy isn't like some guy who wants to have sex with women. He just has that's his kink, is just to show off his body, expose himself. But she's making him sweat. She's totally just like giving him shit. And then some people are coming. And she says, "Here, quick, hide in the bushes. And hand me your clothes so they don't get all dirty in there." And then she gives her dogs a sniff of his clothes. And then she basically says, "Go get him, girls." And the dogs run into the bushes to fuck the guy up. And then she walks off and waits for her dogs to be done. So I guess they're barely anything to do with London. But there's a small connection. Too Late, written by Stuart Home, drawn by Jonathan Edwards. And very fun cartoony style. I think this guy might have drawn for Deadline, but I could be wrong. So basically we see these three young skinhead punks, the good kind of skinheads, not the Nazi kind. And they're occupying the chambers of Westcombe Parish Council. They want to prevent planning permission for a motorway being granted. So the police show up and roust them all up. And then, what's this guy's name again? Give me 1 second. Oh, Counselor Grout shows up. He's like the head counselor. And he's a total corrupt dick. And he basically sends the three of the Green Party guys who were going to vote against the motorway bill. He sends them on some errand so they miss the vote. So he gets his way, Sprout, and the motorway is going to go through. These young punky skinheads, they're just like, that motherfucker. And then the cops take him away for a breach of the peace, as they call it in England. They let him out a little while later. Sounds like it's one of those bullshit laws, just to, when people speak up, they can throw you in jail. They decide to retire to this pub, and they hatch a plan. So they go to the mansion of this Counselor Sprout. The butler's there. And Karen, the woman skinhead, she says, "I'm a big fan of Counselor Sprout. Can I see him? I'd like to give him a blowjob." And without missing a beat, the butler just says, "The master is giving a lecture at the Painted Hall. If you run, you'll catch the end of his talks." So the three skins all run down to the Painted Hall. And the lecture has already begun. They're late. And Counselor Sprout pulls a gun out of his jacket. Because he's talking about Heidegger and life and death, stuff like that. One of his friends says, "Don't do it, Bertie." And Karen just says, "Let me beat your brains out with this brick first." And he kills himself. And they walk away sad that they didn't get to do it themselves. Oh, this is an amazing one. I Keep Coming Back, written by Alan Moore and drawn by Oscar Zarate. These guys collaborated on Small Killing, that great graphic novel from the 90s. And I think this might have been reprinted in one of the From Hell books. This is almost like an unofficial epilogue to From Hell, where we see Whitechapel, the Whitechapel area of London. Now, though, it's current times. And apparently there's a documentary film crew from BBC. And they're filming in this church. And the narrator, who I think is Alan Moore, because he probably, I imagine after From Hell came out, did documentaries about Jack the Ripper. They probably went to him to be a talking head, you know? And he is just describing going to the church and setting it all up for the shoot. But of course, it's Alan Moore's just rich, beautiful language. I like this describing the caretaker at this church. Gently protective of the church, a weary husband with his senile bride. Just little things like that. It's just full of great little descriptions like that. We see the director here, and he thinks to himself, she really is quite pretty. Actually, I just realized this can't be Alan Moore, because later on there's some things where I don't think Alan Moore would admit to doing or thinking. So, but he was probably in this situation. Yeah, that shows how dumb I am. He even mentions how he talks about the Venetian windows and the portico. So he's probably some architecture expert talking about this church for this documentary. Really like Oscar Zarate's art. Just, he's one of the people where his art is inconsistent, but it's almost on purpose. I like it. It's very expressive. He'll draw characters like really cartoony in one panel and then less so in other panels. So he's also talking about Whitechapel, how Whitechapel has kind of become a tourist destination because of the Jack the Ripper murders. That's its claim to fame. So talking about all the people who come with cameras. Each night, the murder tourists photograph the sacred gutters where the bodies were discovered. So across from the shoot, there's a tavern. And I guess one night a week, they have exotic dancers live. They put out a little sign. And so this cameraman from the shoot says, hey, I'll go have a drink with you. Let's go have a drink, to the narrator. And I guess it's different strip clubs in England where it's like theater in the round. There's no stage. The woman just dances around the bar naked. All these businessmen watching are just kind of staring at her with blank looks on their faces, kind of cold and passionless. Her white flesh, corresponding paint chip labeled hint of circulation. Tiny sliver of goth, perhaps 19, sulfate. Tattoos, back at the flat, her baby. And so all these captions are just the narrator's observations of what's going on. All these people, all really well written. He notices that there's a poster on the wall for the victims of the Whitechapel murder of Jack the Ripper. So just like every other business in Whitechapel, they kind of trade off on the grisly history of the neighborhood. So then I guess at the end of the shift, I guess this is what strippers do. They don't get tipped. They just kind of walk around with a little cup or a tip jar. And people tip them if they feel like it. So it seems like they don't make nearly as good money as they do in America. And the narrator gives her a compliment. And he says he does it just out of sympathy. He actually doesn't find her pretty at all. And she's not a very good dancer. And she seems really grateful, though. She's unused to kindness, has no antibodies to protect her from it. Flattered that I spoke to her and not her tits. She's vulnerable. And then he says, I bet that I could knock her off. I bet she'd take me home. So we find out this narrator isn't just the innocuous author of architecture books. The rest of the crew comes over after they finished cleaning up the church. And the director's there. She's not having it. She's not digging this. And then the narrator basically hangs around. Everyone leaves. He says, nobody knows me here. He thinks to himself, wait till she clocks off, walk her home. We find a side street somewhere. I reach into my pocket. And then now it's late at night, and we see the stripper come out of the bar. And we see her walk home, and that narrator's still there checking her out. And he says, I keep coming back. So it's almost like, has this guy been possessed by the spirit of Jack the Ripper? We don't know. But he did, everyone else is gone, and he's still there waiting for the stripper to get off work. So just very, once again, another like nebulous ending, like we don't know. But he definitely gives evidence that almost as if, he says, do these buildings keep the coded centuries? Are the patterns and the plans here filed, the ancient anatomical imperatives? The cobbles coax our steps, the shadows of dead men and the negative space between graffiti. Motive is implicit in the brickwork. So almost like that this Whitechapel is almost like a coded, a codex for, it's haunting this area of land and inspiring other people to become Jack the Ripper. It's almost like Jack the Ripper is haunting the land. But I mean, once again, I could be reading too much into it, but I think that's what he's trying to say. But definitely really well-written story, and I love the art by Zarate, who's also the editor. Good stuff. We have contributors notes, which is always nice. And that's it for It's Dark in London. Hope you guys enjoyed looking at this. I definitely like this book, but like I said, I don't think I understand a bunch of the stories in here. I'm not sure I do, but that could just be me because I'm dumb. So you might get a lot more out of it. But overall, pretty solid comic book collection. So that's it for today's video. And I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.